The United Nations Security Council has now officially approved President Donald Trump's so-called peace plan for Gaza with 13 votes in favor. Now, China and Russia were the only two countries that did not vote in favor, but they also did not vote no. They abstained instead. Now, they could have also used their veto power to veto it, but chose not to, and it's probably because of some threats, which we'll get to in just a minute. Now, if you're wondering what's in this so-called peace plan, it's that 20-point plan that we've covered on this show previously, but just as a reminder, the US resolution calls for an international stabilization force to enter, demilitarize, and govern Gaza. So a cabal of international, leaders coming in and essentially making decisions about Palestinians and the land that they live on. Okay, great. But nonetheless, the proposal, which contained Trump's 20-point ceasefire plan, also envisions a board of peace to oversee the peace plan, though it does not clarify the composition of the board. And there are some serious issues with that, which I'll also get to in just a minute. But after the vote, President Trump did gloat. Before I get to that, your 2 cents, Cenk.
Yeah, so look, there is an upside here to what has happened, but there's 2 massive unanswered questions, and that's where the rubber hits the road. So let's tell you about what happened here and then talk about, but how we're gonna answer those questions and what's next.
So Trump thinks that's it, peace in the Middle East, or at least that's the way he's advertising this. He wrote on Truth Social, "Congratulations to the world on the incredible vote of the United Nations Security Council just moments ago, acknowledging and endorsing the, in all caps, Board of Peace, which will be chaired by me and include the most powerful and respected leaders throughout the world." Now, it will be chaired by the man who just had an Al-Qaeda terrorist in the White House and said glowing things about him, talked about how handsome he was, in fact, aboard Air Force One prior to that. And this is also the same guy who has helped Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, get away with literal murder. He ordered the murder and dismemberment of Washington Post journalist and US resident Jamal Khashoggi. They were complimenting each other in the White House today. So with that in mind, the security resolution, so basically what they're planning on doing here, the Security Council's resolutions are not, they're considered binding under international law. And I'm sure people aren't gonna like that I'm gonna say this, but it's just the truth. International law doesn't mean anything anymore. Okay, beginning with how Biden handled Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people, that allowed for the complete dismantling of international norms and international law. So I don't care what international law says because apparently it doesn't matter. There's no enforcement of it, right? They could call for sanctions. Israel's never gonna face punishment until all these dinosaurs. Anyway, go ahead. I won't finish that sentence.
Look, there is international law for the powerless. So for the Serbs and for many other people, and the Serbs did commit a genocide, and they should be held accountable. And for some African countries, and obviously for Muslim countries, anyone that doesn't have enough power. But there's going to be no accountability for America, Russia, China, and Israel. Magically, Israel, tiny little Israel, has so much power they can make the whole world make junk all of their laws and say, sorry, there's an Israel exception. They do not have to abide by any laws.
Right. So Mike Walls, the US ambassador to the United Nations, who addressed the council before the vote, called Gaza hell on earth and held up a copy of the resolution describing it as a lifeline. He's also the individual who basically threatened all of the members of the UN Security Council who might consider voting no on this by saying, well, if this doesn't pass, then we're gonna go right back to annihilation in Gaza. He didn't use those words, but that was the implication.
Yeah, Mike Waltz is one of the neocons, Israel First guys. So they were gonna put in Elise Stefanik, who's another Israel First person. So when she couldn't do it, they put in Mike Waltz instead. And so he's representing Israel there. So when he says Gaza's hell on earth, he's not saying it like, I can't believe the Israelis did that. He's saying you better accept our proposal, otherwise we're gonna make it twice as hellish. And we're gonna force American taxpayers to pay for it, etc. So look, here are the real questions. Is Israel going to comply with any of this? Because they have literally said, yeah, you guys can do this fun little silly piece of paper at the UN, it's not going to matter at all. Netanyahu came out right afterwards, and this is a thing they've already voted on, and said, no, there will never be a Palestinian state.
Yeah, we have that video actually. Let's take a quick look at that.
And regarding the Palestinian state, our opposition to a Palestinian state on any territory west of the Jordan remains. It is firm and unwavering. It has not changed in the slightest. I have been fending off these attempts for decades now, doing so in the face of both external and internal pressures. So I do not need encouragement, tweets, or lectures from anyone.
Guys, the biggest obstacle to peace in the Middle East is Israel and has been Israel. That's just been a fact. And it's a long-standing fact that our government refuses to acknowledge, to validate, and pretending like the powerless people in this whole scenario, the Palestinian civilians, both in Gaza and the West Bank, by the way, where violence has really exploded against the Palestinians as a result of these Israeli-backed settlers. Like, that continues to be a problem. That's not part of this peace plan. There is no real peace plan. Like, that's the thing that drives me crazy about all of this. There's no peace plan because you don't have a partner in actually negotiating a real peace plan, okay? Israel is not a partner for peace.
No, of course they're not. I mean, they just said it.
They just said it.
Yeah, like we are never going to give the Palestinians a state and nothing will make us do it. Now, of course, we can make them do it. We could just threaten to take their money away or other things, right? But they know, no, we have America completely under our thumb. So they're not, no, we make them do things. They don't make us do things. So yeah, we make them sign this junk piece of paper and then later, we'll say, yeah, we're violating. So the first question is, how are we ever going to get Israel to comply with international law?
Never, it's not gonna happen.
They say they're not going to, and America makes sure that they never do.
We embolden them to behave that way.
So now we got this great international agreement, and there is something, not great, but there is something positive in it, which is that yes, the Arab countries and Turkey, et cetera, have said, okay, we'll do it. We'll bring in security and we'll make sure that Gaza is safe, they don't attack you, and you don't kill the Palestinians anymore. That's a great offer, and I appreciate that, and they're in favor of it, right? But at least to the second question, no one's talking about the 53% that Israel occupies. So they ethnically cleansed half of Gaza, they completely occupy it now, and they're in the middle of flattening literally every building there so they could rebuild it, Israeli condos there. So what are we gonna do with that half of Gaza?
We know what's gonna happen with that half of Gaza. That's why this is all a farce. This is why I want nothing more than to celebrate an actual peace plan that legitimately leads to a two-state solution. That's not what this is. That's very, very clear to me. And it's because of the same mind virus that infects President Trump on other issues, which is, how can I make money off of this? Jared Kushner salivating over that oceanfront property. You think this is all a mistake, like it's all an accident? No, the reason why Trump wants to be the chairman of this so-called peace board is because he wants to oversee the money-making opportunities for himself and his family.
Look, I just make billions. I don't care about your stupid corruption.
You're 80,
just get out of Gaza. Get the Israelis out of Gaza, and then if you want to build spectacular things for the Palestinians, amazing, great. And you want to make a killing off of it, I don't, just please leave them alone. Give them their own country. But Israel is blocking peace. It is, and in this, the reason the Russians and the Chinese abstain is because they're like, the Israelis say they won't leave. So what is this? This is nonsense, right? Okay, the Egyptians and the Turks and the Indonesians say, yeah, they'll do it and they'll participate, and I don't want you to keep slaughtering the Palestinians, so I'll just abstain. But we all know this is a joke, because the Israelis are never going to leave. This was always about taking land. And so, but our deeply corrupt media in this country never tells you any of that.
The other thing is, it really does look like the stabilization forces are going to be utilized to fight Hamas on behalf of the IDF instead of actually stabilizing for peace. And they're worried about that. So while they've volunteered, and while their public statements seem as though they're totally on board for this, there have been some internal discussions about their concerns that they're just going to be used and they're just going to sacrifice members of their own militaries in order to fight Hamas on behalf of Israel.
Yeah, Yeah, and so I don't even have a problem with them fighting Hamas, and I love that they're trying to actually protect the Palestinians, and that's part of the point there, and I hope nothing goes wrong there. But basically what Israel and America are trying to trick them into doing is, why don't you be our cops for us and make sure those dirty Palestinians don't come into our new precious greater Israel, which we just stole from them, okay? So if they just turn into Israeli cops, then yeah, there's going to be unrest and violence, and it's going to turn into an absolute disaster. And then what will Israel say after that? Well, you see that we had the Muslims run it on their own, and it turned into a mess. I guess we're going to have to take the other half of Gaza. And so if you don't agree to that, you're an anti-Semite. So this is planned to explode on these well-meaning countries who are trying to protect the Palestinians. And America is aiding and abetting more of Israel's war crimes. So everybody, look, again, guys, if you live in America and you watch mainstream media, you have no idea how much of a tiny bubble you're in. The rest of the planet sees this perfectly clearly. You're the only ones who don't see it because you're being lied to by ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSN, MS Now, and Fox News, okay? And New York Times and Washington Post, they're all lying to you and pretending that Israel didn't take half of Gaza and that Israel didn't do this for land, and Israel doesn't have a greater Israel plan, which is the whole point is steal Arab land, genocide, ethnic cleansing, doesn't matter, just take the land, and they did it. And American media lied to you and pretended that if you criticize that you hated Jews.
It's ridiculous. Anyway.
No, they're evil. Mainstream media is evil in their protection of genocide as long as Israel does it. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.